All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to this webinar on building managerial effectiveness for mid-managers. Mid-managers are responsible for execution of the strategy. We all know that strong middle management also provides organizations with the pipeline for future leaders, and mid-managers are the backbone of any organization, especially large ones, as they provide the vital link between the top management at one hand and the base of the organization at the other hand. In this webinar, what we bring to you is an understanding of what works when you take up the agenda of building leadership at the mid-levels of your organizations. The webinar is brought to you by InspireOne, and a quick introduction of InspireOne. InspireOne is a leading consulting firm which offers solutions around leadership and around organization development. The solutions range across certain areas or buckets. These include leadership development and culture change. They also include areas of productivity, excellence, customer centricity, and sales performance. The solutions of InspireOne are brought to you along with their partners. TMI, which is a global company looking at the aspects of especially culture change and customer centricity. TAC, which looks at sales and sales leadership know-how. And then we have the IBM, which looks at a lot of leadership development and also culture change initiatives. At TMI, we use our partner company know-how, and we also customize this for our Indian clients. A quick introduction to the people who would be conducting this webinar. We are very happy to have with us Himanshu. Himanshu Miglani just let me introduce him to you. He's currently the Group Head Center of Excellence Human Resources at Escorts, handling a wide range of roles, which includes talent management, performance management, learning and development, joining and induction, exit, HR policies, process audits, campus hirings, and campus connect. Himanshu comes with an over a decade of years of experience in the corporate. He has experience of working at various levels in a number of organizations like Vodafone, American Express, Aviva, and Kotak Mahindra, and has worked across many functions like sales, operations, and of course HR. His rich experience in designing and complete on learning and development process, succession planning, leadership development, competency mapping, e-learning development, and so on, will add a lot of value to today's webinar. He's certified L&D manager from Carlton Management Institute of US. Welcome to this webinar, Himanshu.
Thank you.
I will be the moderator and also a presenter in this webinar. My name is Neeta Mohla, and I look after the leadership vertical at InspireOne. My areas of specialization are largely leadership and emotional intelligence. So we're very happy to be in this webinar with all of you. Just a quick recap on how we will be conducting this webinar and how we can hope for your participation. So what we would do is we would request all of you to be on mute and put any questions that you have on the chat box. We will take up your questions at the end of every section rather than leaving it for the end. And if there is anything that we are not able to address during the course of this 1 hour, we will certainly be connecting with you post the webinar to address any concerns. So we hope for your active participation and any questions or any suggestions that you may have through the process and also at the end of the process. Let me now take you through the agenda of this next 1 hour. So the areas that we will be covering in this webinar is, firstly, we will look at the need for managerial effectiveness. Like we said in the introduction, it's a very critical element of any organization leadership structure, the middle management. So why is it very important to focus on it, and where do some of the gaps really come up is what we will cover in the need. The second is we will look at some of the practices that exist, what are the current practices that exist in different organizations, so that we know what different organizations are also focusing on. And from there, we will draw upon the learning. So, looking at the gaps, looking at what currently organizations are doing, where could the gaps really exist in the process of developing mid managers? And finally, we will take up two important case studies. These are best practices. The first one, we will, of course, lean upon Himanshu to take us through the Escorts case study. They've been doing some wonderful work around development of middle managers. And the second is we will also talk about a large BFSI conglomerate, some of the work that they are doing at mid-manager level, which is also showing great results. So that is the agenda, and I would like to start with the first part, which is really going over the need, because when we understand the need and we understand the gaps, then any process that we follow in our organizations will be more precise, will be more focused on the real needs of managers at this level. So I would start with looking at a little bit around the historical perspective. Um Middle management development in a way is not a new thing. And if we really sort of look at the charter of how organizations have grown, there has obviously been a speed of growth and a spur of growth post the opening of the economy in the year 2000. This is when manufacturing and IT boom really happened, and as a result of this boom, all organizations in this sector and many other sectors got an opportunity to really grow fast. With this growth, however, came an exodus of talent, because talent was required by several organizations, and we saw that switch, especially at the mid management level, where mid managers started focusing on their careers, and to an extent, the connect with the organization, the loyalty with the organization began to come down. It was easy for people to move and to focus on what they really wanted, when the organizations, on the other hand, had to cope with this quick exodus. Um, as this GDP growth really accelerated, what also then began to happen was that uh, people got opportunities to move into senior roles without really developing the base competencies. And sometimes we also had people coming in from business schools, of course, with the theoretical knowledge, well equipped with theoretical knowledge, but on the ground, the experience that was required to perform the role was not deep enough for them to be really effective. And as a result of that, we saw some of the impact in terms of, for example, attrition. One of the things that really came up, low team engagement, low team motivation, and business profitability also beginning to get impacted. So people, in effect, one of the things that a lot of people said in this particular scenario was that people have moved up to the roles really fast. They're not ready to perform these roles as yet, and there seems to be a lot of competency gap which needs to be bridged. That is one scenario coming from the historical perspective of growth in India, the opportunities of growth in India. And if we look at another scenario, and here we are looking at typically legacy organizations, they already had this, mid-management band, and a fairly padded one at that. So a lot of people who had grown to these mid-management roles, they were tenured in the organization, so they had matured with this tenure. However, they were not really keeping up with the pace of change that was required, and so you had this, big layer in the middle, not really being very effective again, because not really adapting to the change that is required by them, of for them in their roles. And then typically what was happening was they became the barriers to any change and any growth, because they made everything in the organization a little sluggish. So that was a big challenge for organizations, especially legacy organizations. These managers were required because they had the knowledge, they had some experience, but they were not fast enough to grow or to renew. And therefore, that became another challenge for legacy organizations. In fact, I'm going to turn to Himanshu now. So, Himanshu, I know that, from your profile, you have experience both in the organizations that are, let's say, multinational in nature, and, supposedly more some organizations that are also supposedly more agile, let's say Vodafone, and also you have experience in the legacy organizations. So, what is your understanding or your experience around this area of, what was really happening to managers in the middle level, and what was it that was lacking in them, which was not allowing organizations to grow?
Good morning, everyone. I think primarily organizations have been changing, the markets have been changing drastically. And basis this change, with the pace of this change, the people have not been given those ample opportunities to build and change. For example, most of the organizations today either have such big, vast competency libraries which become so difficult for people to perform in their current role, or the competencies which they have are so obsolete, which have not uh, changed over a period of time. So, what has happened because of this? The strategic movements keeps on happening. Organization keeps on changing the standard. Today we are going to do this. Tomorrow we're going to do this. But the middle management, which is the backbone for the organization, have not been able to develop themselves. And because of this, the competency, the skill required by them and required for the organization, the gap widened. This is also uh, very important for any organization today because they are the key drivers. We call them mountain movers. These are the people who keeps the tick moving. They are the one who actually keeps the ship moving day in day out. So for them, what they expect from the organization and what organization expects from them, that gap has also widened. I think that is something that is an organization I have worked with. I face that a lot of times. There's a huge gap in what people are looking for and what people are offered. The competencies are not matching. Most of the organizations, what they do is they keep updating their behavioral competencies or leadership competencies over every 3 or 4 years. But functional competencies, which is primary, 80% of the time are on the job, on the role. They do not get updated. They do not get changed. So that is also, I think, a big gap there.
Right. So thank you, Himanshu. I think very correctly said. So on one hand, even though you have great competency frameworks, they're not really helpful because they're quite, I would say, either they're obsolete or they're very elaborate.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the functional competencies, if these are not clearly defined, then I think the role, because it requires both functional and leadership competencies, the role itself, it becomes difficult for people to even understand what is required for them in that role, especially the functional gaps. And this is exactly what we have also seen, where people have sort of looked at a lot of these management development programs as the need came up. A lot of these programs also started, developing,
Right.
both whether for companies in house or externally. But again, it was really vacillating between two things. Either these were really highly, what we say, glamorous leadership workshops or leadership behavioral change programs, which people couldn't really, understand. It was difficult for them to connect all these behaviors to their role, and so they understood it, but it never got implemented. Or if there were more run of the mill kind of routine programs of, management development that people found not very exciting, really leading to what we feel two things. One is either people get frozen because you say, oh, these are the expectations, and I don't even know what these are, so I get more frozen. And the more I get frozen, the more I become, less adaptable. And the second is that if I'm adaptable and if I'm moving in directions, I'm moving all over the place, and it's not really concentrating on what my role demands me to do. So this is what is the experience that a lot of organizations are facing today with their management development process. And one of the things that we will look at later is, for example, Himanshu's experience of how for in escorts they have sort of overcome this challenge.
I think another dimension I would like to add here that most of the organizations when they start putting in leadership development programs, especially behavioral change programs, I think a real expectation or the timeline that they set. especially with the mid managers, needs to be very clearly defined, because I think over a period of time, the the expectation is to have a behavioral change overnight. The expectation is to, you learn the concept, start implementing from day one. It becomes also a little bottleneck from the organization perspective, because behavioral change does not change overnight. That is also, we need to keep in mind that what is the timeline that we're keeping when we put in an effort to for our leaders to start behaving like the way the organization expect them to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to build on what Himanshu has said, and I would like to really quote a little bit of research at this point of time, just to bring that point more sharply and more tangibly. We do say that the CEO's performance is as good as their middle managers, where otherwise a CEO strategy is not going to get implemented. But these are some of the researches that were done by several, universities, and actually, colleges like Wharton, etc. And they give a very good idea about what this gap is all about. So I'm going to take this one by one. First of all, it's interesting to say that managers themselves believe that they are only operating at best at 55% effectiveness, which means there's a huge gap. If you really translate it into a week's work, 2 days in a week they're not really performing tasks which the role demands. So there is a huge leakage and wastage over there, only 55%. So that was the point where Himanshu said that the gap is really increasing. Secondly, when middle managers were developed, the variance in the revenue, you can see the impact is 22.3%, which is quite phenomenal for any business manager, and clearly they would want this. How important is leadership development for them? What they do believe is that whatever programs are being offered to them, it's not effective. So they're saying that nearly half of the respondents are saying that whatever is being done is poor or ineffective. So clearly, there's a need to relook at the management development program process. And also, what they're saying is, however, that if they can develop leadership competencies and leadership skills, so let's say you develop your leadership at the mid management, and Himanshu, to your point, it cannot be done overnight. So it has to be a process. Then it is one of the main drivers for actually achieving goals for an organization, business results. So I think that from a statistical point of view, from a rational point of view, it's a big area. And I think the reason we are discussing this today is that it is an issue across organizations as well. So we'll come to what are the areas or the focus areas in which this development needs to be done. Looking at the role, which is really in three parts. Integrator, we are saying that they're integrators between ensuring that the strategy of the organization integrates into the lower levels of the organization and actually gets executed. So that is really critical. Facilitator role, because they are now responsible for also working across functions. So there has to be a more of a cross-functional work kind of skills that need to be developed and need to be demonstrated. So the role of facilitator in bringing diversity, different groups together. And finally, the role of an implementer, which is ensuring that the strategy of the organization is getting implemented, and the change that is required in people to be able to do that is really the focus that they have. So from a focus area of development, it is around these three roles. And this therefore should definitely lead to, and this is what we can measure in their development, operational excellence, at least from a 2 year kind of a framework. The second is leadership to the business. That means with developing leadership skills at their level and offering leadership to the business so that there's followership. And finally, a healthy development of a leadership pipeline. So this is just to give an idea that it has to be looked at from all these three angles, and being able to really measure success is to say that okay, if success is initiated at the top and fulfilled at the bottom, it is really nurtured and matured in the middle levels of the organization. So that is what we are really looking at when we are looking at the need. We are looking at statistics. We are looking at real issues that are happening on the ground. So clearly, focus is required in this area. So, Himanshu, anything you would like to add? Because what I would encourage is any question or clarification that we have from the audience. At this point, we'll take that on. Himanshu, would you like to add anything?
I think I would like to take questions because that'll give us a fair bit of idea what people are thinking, and that will give us more clarity.
Right. So we do have a question which is from the audience, which is saying that one of the challenges that they have is that they hire mid managers from, let's say, tier one business schools, B schools, and obviously these are people who are highly talented. They are taken at mid management levels. They typically have to work with people who are tenured, and they come with a very high ambition and are looking for quick growth. Sometimes the organization pace is not keeping pace with their need for growth. So if this is the challenge that they have, the question is, what what does one do to handle this challenge?
Anita, very valid question because most of times I work with organizations which hire people both at mid level and an entry level. Especially with legacy organization, this is a bigger challenge because when we say mid management, we have people who are about 10 years of experience and an average age of around 35, 34. So what happens is when they see somebody 10 years younger or maybe 7 years younger coming in and working with them in the same category, uh, they also feel what is happening in the organization. Where is the organization going? On the other side, these people who we really hire from reputed business colleges, they are looking because they have been tuned, they have been conditioned, they have studied in such an environment that for them, they need to be really agile. The action needs to be taken right now. And what happens when they join legacy organization? They see the pace too slow, especially with the one of the eminent aspects of legacy organization is decision making process, which is takes so many days, so many months sometimes, and it keeps lingering on. Now people at that level, they really get frustrated. One, with the internal environment, the decision making processes, and also because of the peer pressure. Because the community they operate in, that the people they meet every day, now those people they share their experiences. We had a similar kind of challenge when we started hiring a couple of years ago. The only learning that we have is we tried to create one thing. We created some processes. One is we ensure we create a very clear expectation on day one when we go and hire them, because they may be really good in terms of strategy thinking, conceptualization. However, knowing business is very important for them because a lot of business decisions which look really short term gain, but maybe on a long term spectrum they we may not be that impactful. Secondly, we also carved out special roles for these people, and especially dealing with those people who have the decision making powers. So, for example, when we went to Ahmedabad, we specially categorized that these people need to work only with CEOs, maybe as an executive assistant to them, strategic partners with them, or in the roles which give them ample empowerment and decision making authority. That is where the measurement of also these people, the learning when they bring in a different perspective, they bring in the entrepreneurship, the mindset they bring in to work in a completely like a startup kind of environment. We cater to that environment, and the expectation meets the organization requirements also,
As
because
well, yeah.
a lot of legacy organizations are looking to start something new. They want the startup culture to bring in there. They want the project teams to work in there.
Sure.
So I think that is where we are able to address that. But yeah, I completely agree. To the other side, if I see the current middle management, they also face a similar challenge because they feel they're not able to match up with the pace these people are working on.
So, Himanshu, I think that's a very innovative way of really looking at giving them a roles where their entrepreneurial capabilities, strategic thinking capabilities, and their strengths are used Two, giving them a lot of empowerment so that they are able to get over, otherwise it'll be very frustrating, that is managing that part of it.
Right.
And the third that you're saying is also the right expectation setting, which is to say that there is a gap between the theoretical knowledge and the requirement of the business. I mean, it
Right.
takes time. There is a
Absolutely.
value to experience as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for that. I think that those are great ideas, and I hope that it'll be useful for the audience to implement some of them. We'll just move on. I think I can see there may be a couple of more questions, but we will just take them at the appropriate time as well.
Okay.
Uh, so we're looking at now the second section, which is about what are organizations doing? What are some of the things that we can learn from what's happening currently, and also what may not be happening from all of this. Just a quick, I'm just adding on to Himanshu some of the comments that we also have heard from significant leaders. So, for example, the first one is talking about the fact that, the feeling is that people are being promoted too soon. So, clearly highlighting the competency gap. The second one, of course, when we're looking at the fact, the importance and criticality, we may have covered this. The third one is really the point that you also made, that the leadership, how do you develop them for leadership, like you talked about using some of the leadership qualities. And also the last one, that there could be gaps. So the awareness that there could be gaps, especially in the experience side, from the knowledge that people gather in B schools and the requirement of the business on the ground. Um, if we really look at, and we've done a fair amount of gathering of information of how people are tending to this, and we've seen that it is a variety of things that people are doing. Some organizations are largely focusing, for example, on the individual development planning. So if IDPs are made, the assumption is that people have clarity on what they need to do, and hopefully the development will happen. Of course, assessments are coming up in big ways. So whether it is a 360 assessment, I think that's also to bring that insight
Right.
into what is it that I need to develop. The third is that if you're looking at this, especially for high potential, because of course coaching is an expensive proposition, but at least if we do have high potential, so if you attach them to a peer or a coach or a mentor, that is one way of developing at least a few people who are high potential. The second is that where we're looking at a role-based or a competency-based intervention. So organization-wide, we find that people are not taking accountability or not making decisions. So let's do some workshop and interventions around these competencies. Or in their role, let's look at what is it that they need to do in order for them to meet, let's say, largely functional competencies. And of course, sometimes where organizations are looking at value based or culture based, so these are usually organization wide interventions where also, let's say, the middle managers get covered. But in our experience and in our understanding, what we've also seen is that uh, you know uh, organizations may not be looking at it in a complete holistic way. So it is quite dissipated, like sometimes we do this, sometimes we do that. And in fact, if you look at, again, I'm quoting certain research, even a high potential development, like the point that you said earlier, competencies take time, is a 2.5 year kind of a process. So, do we have the sustaining power to develop mid managers for this long period? A lot of organizations will put up their hand and say no. But also, then the mid managers will say that, and if you ask them, only 10% will say, I've been given enough input and opportunity for me to be able to play my role. So somewhere there is reluctance from organizations. Possibly a lot of budgets go either into developing, let's say, the top managers, and there aren't enough budgets really for mid managers. I don't know what is the issue, but clearly there is an issue between what the organizations are willing to do and what is really required for this long-term kind of development. Anything you would like to add on to this, Himanshu?
There are a lot of things I see happening. And yesterday I was speaking to one of my colleague, and she was asking me about an engagement survey that we would like to do, and she asked me a very valid question: what kind of engagement survey we would like to do, what organization is looking for, or what people is looking for. Because most of the time, what happens is a lot of organizations today really do not carve out what they really want. It is just a flavor of the season that, this competition is doing this, let us also do this. This industry is doing this, let us also do this. And the flavor keeps changing. People remain the same. After a certain time, people keep changing, and again a new flavor is added. So I think before we start any initiative, I think as an organization, any organization should really do a dipstick and understand the gap between what organization is looking for and what people are looking for. Because I see there is a huge gap there. Secondly, most of these initiatives which you talk about, for example, individual development plans, 360-degree. I think before starting any new initiative, let us go back a few years and understand how many IDPs have we built in over a period of time and how many have been successful. How many have been able to match the aspiration of the candidate and the organization need. What we primarily do is we create a performance potential 9-grid matrix. A lot of organizations do not add the third dimension to it, which is the criticality. So what happens is we have a person ready for the job. We're trying to build that person ready for the job, but that may not be ready for next 3 years. So what happens? We lose that sight with the business exigencies every day. Secondly, most of the objectives get lost during a period of time. So when we start a 360-degree, for example, the objective that we started 360-degree and the way the program ends or the initiative ends, there is a gap in both the things. So we are even, maybe the organizations are not able to sustain the objective and the outcome they're looking for. And a clear example, I was sitting one of very senior leader yesterday. We recently did a 360-degree, and he was amazed to see his report. He was saying that how can my team and my peer give me less score what I have given? A real scenario. And I was astonished the way he was speaking that my boss gives me high score than I have given. How come my peer and my team give me less? And whom should I look at? Should I look at my manager whom I need to impress for my promotions and my career growth, or should I look at my peer and my team? Because I think we have somewhere down the line not given them a clear objective why this 360-degree have been done. And I was explaining to him, now the next stage is we'll take you to the report, we'll make you understand what you need to do with this report and how the entire intervention or learning intervention will be carved out for them, very clear objectives and very clear timelines. I think also, especially at the mid-level, a lot of organizations look at pumping leadership programs. Like for example, when we say role-based interventions, they want to do a 3-month intervention. Let's do 3-month intervention and create them for next level. Let us do a 6-month intervention. Let's take them for next level. But I feel there is still a lot more to people to learn to go at the next level. So I think ample time, ample objective, very clear guidelines, and very clear IDP accountabilities needs to be set for the organization, which is a clear miss.
Sure. I totally agree with you. I think on one hand, sometimes we are rushing things. We're wanting quick change, quick fix, hurry up, and that kind of things. At other points, they're not connected completely. So it's like all over the place and leading people also to be all over the place. And the third aspect is really the measurement piece, the accountability piece. How do we make sure we are measuring the right things and we are also, sort of accountable for the right things? I would like to take one question at this point, which we've got quite a lot of questions actually coming up. And I think this question is talking about the fact that considering the VUCA environment, what critical competencies would be needed for mid-management levels? So maybe I can just give my view and then you can also add to it, Himanshu. So when we are looking at the role, and we talked about the 3 aspects of the role earlier as well. So really this is, and the outcomes also, I think in the earlier slide where we said operational excellence for at least 2 years, having a 2-year kind of horizon. Now that is one very clear expectation from that role of a mid-manager. So how do I constantly improve operational processes in my role, which have an impact not for the year but at least for 2 to 3 years, will be one clear area of what we could call the competency of continuous improvement or improving processes. That is a clear requirement from the role. When you do that, you have to lead people, you have to manage people and lead them towards change. Also, you are managing the change that is coming from the top. So managing change, leading change in their own teams becomes a very critical component, and developing their people to be able to successfully operate in the new changing requirement would be a second broad area. And I think at a mid-manager level, what comes up in the role is also this cross-functional working, because you have to at this level also work on the interdependencies with other functions. So how do you lead this whole cross-functional piece, build cross-functional teams to execute and manage collaboration becomes a very critical part of the role. So and Himanshu, I'll turn to you to add to this, because this is coming largely from the step up from the first time manager role to the mid manager role, but I'm sure you have more things to add as well.
See, from the functional competency level perspective, I feel an organization should really know what the person role is and what is desired out of it. A lot of times when we go and do a survey for mid management, they say, and even while we're doing an exit interviews for them, they say there is no role clarity. So what happens is, what is expected out of my role, what is the competency that I need at my role is really important. The second aspect of it is the leadership competencies, because these people are now being allocated a team, they'll be handling a set of people. So I think most of them do not understand the way they function. It's more about knowing self first and then managing people. So while I was speaking to one of the middle manager who's been recently promoted, now been given a big team, he says, I never knew my management style or my communication style. So most of the organization today have competencies defined. For example, collaboration, they talk about respect, they talk about agility, they talk about innovation. I think people leadership, handling people is a very important aspect for a mid manager. The second piece I'd say is the communication piece, because a lot of people, uh, especially with specific roles they have been hired for, they're not tuned to do a lot of communication with their teams, and also how to communicate. That also plays a very vital role for a middle manager, because till now they were operating as an individual contributor. When they get into a people manager role, they feel that people understand the intent and the way they're communicating, and there is a huge gap between the intent and the way things are communicated. So if the intent and the communication remain the same and they learn how to communicate things to the people, I think that really plays on the middle management side.
Sure. So, two things I'm constantly just summarizing. One is, of course, we talked about the leadership competencies, but equally important is the functional
Yes.
competencies.
Yes.
So, the functional competencies still remain very critical, especially if they have to work with process improvements. At the
Right.
end of the day, it's the functional competencies that come into play.
Right.
But along with that are the leadership competencies of knowing how to develop your people, of collaboration, of implementing change, of ensuring that you are
Right.
reviewing and increasing or the effectiveness and the efficiency of the organization goals.
Right.
I'll summarize all of this through the learnings, because I think we've just talked about it, and then we can take one more question. What we are saying is that a management development at the mid level and at any levels is a very thorough. It's what we are doing, but it's also the processes that we are following in order to do that, which become very critical. And we are just looking at successful leadership programs across the world and just drawing certain learnings. This is a research by McKinsey, which says that first of all, it's very difficult. I mean, development is not easy and it takes time. So the first tip is focus on what really matters. So, which means the business part of it. An organization may be in a growth phase, an organization may be in a startup phase. The competencies required for both may be very different. So, focus on what is very critical for the organization, that is very important, and which directly links to business performance. And that is why functional competencies also kick in over here, because they, along with leadership competencies, you can show the impact on business performance. So don't focus on a lot, focus on a little, but focus on what is very important. And that was the point that you said: understand organization requirement, personal requirements, and bring the two together. The second is a journey. So this is not a one-shot approach. It has to be. So we say 6 times organizations that focus on a journey approach are 6 times more likely than the rest to have an organization-wide intervention. So what we are saying, or what this research was saying, is that for an initiative to be successful, since it's going to be a journey, make sure that there are some organization wide initiatives that are also supporting this.
Yes.
So let's say, for example, you're looking at employee engagement becoming higher, then of course all the sub initiatives should start linking and talking to this entire organization piece. So you're also looking at an ecosystem support simultaneously. The third is the big focus on how the transfer of learning is happening. So most of the people, and I would corroborate this, even today people will say, how do we measure success of an organization? And then they'll turn around and say it's really to do with how well the facilitator has facilitated a program. Whereas really it's got to do with how well has the learner applied what they have learned on the job. So yeah, so the real focus, because it's very difficult to measure that, and I think there is a question around it, and we can address it after this. But really looking at the application of learning and how that's going to happen, paying more attention to that rather than just the content of learning and facilitator feedback and how good people are feeling after the program. That's really not so important. And finally, how do we reinforce or lock in the change? So typically we all know the change curve. So initially there's excitement, but how do we make this a habit? How do we make sure that we are reinforcing, we are providing more visibility to, let's say, senior managers? How are we ensuring that the mentoring, coaching process, or the project management that comes along with an initiative like this is locking in the learning into a habit, into an organization's DNA? So I think when we focus on these four areas, that's what will really bring us success. Himanshu, you would like to add?
I think we'll talk more about it when we'll try to discuss the case study, because what we have tried to put in all these components and put the puzzle together at Escorts. So I'll try to cover all those linkages what they're talking about, and I think that will give you a fair bit of idea that what we're planning to do and what we're currently also doing.
Great. And we can link it to a question that we have from the audience, which says that we have challenges of measuring effectiveness
Yes.
of learning interventions, especially the behavioral competencies, to the top or bottom line, apart from the operational matrix. Could you brief any tested models? So I'm sure you will be covering this,
Yeah.
and we can
Yes.
both add whatever we have from our experience of the kind of measures.
Right.
So we are right away going into the best practices, and over to you, Himanshu, for taking us through what you're doing in Escorts for this level and also these challenges. Yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Neeta. So when we started this journey almost 4 years ago, and we tried to look at what are the key challenges for the middle management, and let us also go about looking at the root cause. What is bringing those challenges on the table? So we realized that the middle management, in fact, the entire organization does not have functional competencies defined on a piece of paper. So when the roles are not very clearly carved out, or I would say roles are carved out but they're not defined in what the role is supposed to do, then become very difficult for them to be developed on those cases. So 2 years ago, that took us almost 2 years to understand that how many roles are there, overlapping roles are there, organization have been changing, there have been huge change in the top level. So it took us almost 2 years to finalize the critical roles, the roles in the organization, and we created a complete functional competency dictionary. And again, I tell you, it is a very detailed exercise, because we involved more than 200 people managers, top management, understanding the roles, because there were so many overlapping roles. So it's very easy to say that these two people work on the production table at the same manner. He works in A shift, he works in B shift. But when it comes to writing it down, the skills required for them, it is not very easy. Most of the people managers find it very difficult to do a change or understand the difference between a line manager to a line lead. So this was a bigger challenge. The second thing that we also looked at is the understanding of the leadership competencies and simplifying it to understand the behaviors to people. Because a lot of time when the framework of leadership competency comes into picture, People see it as a jargon. People don't understand what they're supposed to understand from a leadership or a behavioral competency. Are those behaviors, those very simplified to a layman person who's reading the competency, understand where do I fit in? Which role do I need to do? So, basis this, we created a model, we call it Escorts Career Acceleration Program, ECAP. We started this last year, and uh, we started this model first with the sales and marketing team, and we identified the critical roles. We're not doing it for everybody in the organization because we understand it requires a lot of time, energy, effort, as well as investment. And we try to also put in all the components to make it a complete wholesome approach. So we identify the critical mid-level rules. We understand. So I remember clearly. I sat with all the national heads and understand what does this role do, and what is expected of these roles. And then going back to the functional competencies which they have given for the role, and simplifying it that okay, this person is required to do analysis, this person is required to do a strategy for the organization. And to understand, you need to understand what the ratios are, what are mathematical ratios, what is the balance sheet, what is the profit and loss account, what is the cash flow statement. Those things were carved in very simpler manner. And then we look at that whether we have internal capability to do it or do we need some SME to help us do that. So there are a lot of things. For example, we have product. Most of 90% of our people who we hire today are engineers, mechanical engineers. So in terms of product, we have tractor, we have construction equipment, we have railway equipment. So we say we can do it internally. Then for external, for behavioral components, for example, execution excellence, strategic orientation, people leadership, can we partner with some other internal organization, external organization who can help us build that. So that's when we explored InspireOne and brought in InspireOne. When we're designing the journey, I'll tell you, there were a lot of components were coming in, people not sure whether we should do it, what should be the outcome of it, how long should be the journey, how will we link it back to business. The same question which you asked a couple of minutes ago, how will behavior change be managed, or we can measure that or not. So these all questions were also asked by the leadership team when we went them that we are planning to do this. And we try to create all those components put in together as part of the journey. For example, uh, we went back and shown these are, so we went back to Inspire and said these are our leadership competencies. We need an assessment tool which can help us to identify these competencies and also map behaviors to it. So that is where a tool which is Sukuna Watson has been used to measure the 12 high performance behaviors which have been also linked to our internal functional competencies. So there will be a pre-assessment and a post-assessment which can see the movement of behaviors in the competencies that has happened or not. Secondly, the biggest critical part for us was ensuring that the projects, the learning should go back to the projects. The business should get an outcome related initiative. So we ensure the top leadership team needs to sign off on the project that needs to be given to these people. So there were 4 themes defined: business leadership, execution leadership, people leadership, product knowledge. Basis that, we created a model which helped the people also to understand, if I learn today, I need to go back and reinforce and implement those learnings. Every month, every alternate month, there are workshops, classroom workshop, but there are also group coaching as part of the model, wherein in smaller groups they're able to attain what are the challenges that I'm facing while implementing those learnings. So if you see, there is a model which is instructor-led, digital learning, and a monthly evaluation. So there's a lot of small nuggets going through Mastero, a digital lab, about the learnings they have gone through in the instructor-led. So everybody, approximately 400 people who are going through this entire initiative, now understand what do I need to achieve in the next 6 months or 9 months, what are the competencies I need to build, what are my challenges, and how do I work on it. Secondly, I think the bigger aspect for them is to also understand how are they developing individually, because it's an organizational initiative to work on middle management development. So the biggest aspect and the motivating factor for them is we have linked this with the performance management. The linkage with the performance management ensures that it is institutionalized as part of the organization. So every individual, maybe at a mid level, both at the sales and the service level, they have their increments linked to their performance, but their promotions and the elevations are linked to this initiative. That brings a more value to this initiative because now they know that if I achieve this percentage, if I achieve this much of product, outcome, I'll be able to go to the next level. Now that is the biggest turnaround for this initiative because there's a lot of fairness, there's a lot of transparency, there is lot of opportunity for each one of the individual because there's somebody who says that my boss only speaks to one guy and he's the most favorable guy, he will only get promotion. Right. Now there is data talking about it, there's project talking about it. That means I also have equal and ample opportunity to grow within the system and prove that I am also equally or more capable than the other person, and that has a big impact. So that is where this initiative has really helped us to build in the middle management, the capability for them. Now, as a model for sales and marketing, we'll also be working similarly the critical role for the manufacturing and R&D, because if my sales are really able to achieve and be more efficient, the R&D also needs to create those models, new models. The manufacturing also needs to create manufacturing, bringing into world-class manufacturing. So we also institutionalizing the same process, replicating the same model in the other functions.
And Himanshu, just taking that question, the effectiveness, how we are measuring the effectiveness. Could you just also I know you gave some examples, but just summarize that. How do we know that this is really giving us business outcomes?
See, there are a lot of ways we are measuring it. One way, we have put in a weightage of the initiative. There's a weightage have been given to the observations apart from the business project. For example, how this person is going and implementing the learnings from the classroom at their regions. So we're also taking a feedback from their team members. That is one piece. Secondly, the group coach is also observing them during the coaching sessions. How are they asking questions? Whether they're really going and working on the behavioral change that they have taken up. Because as part of the project, they are supposed to take the two bottom high performance behaviors as part of the project. That means they need to work. For example, if gathering intelligence is my low performance behavior, I have to improve on gathering high intelligence in the next 9 months. That means while I'm on the project, I also have to start working. How do I build in data? What do I need to put in together? And those have been facilitated by the group coach. The third is the assessment I've already spoken about. The assessment will give us very clear demarcation of the behavioral change, because again, these assessments are not generic assessments. These online assessments are based on caselets. So we have given case studies, especially 8 case studies we have given as part of this assessment, which are primarily on the role based. So when I say there's a new dealer been inducted in your region and he's facing a lot of challenges while moving the finances, what would you do as a regional manager? So what all options as a regional manager you put in there, it pick up that data and give you those behavioral traits.
Right.
So while the post assessment will happen, we'll also raise the bar and put in different case studies and see whether the behavioral movement has really happened or not.
Right.
It's more customized to the role rather than the generic what the other psychometric or other assessments do.
Right. And I think I'm just, it's great because you're measuring not just the outcome of the project, because that you can, but you're also measuring the change in behavior.
Yes.
And you're taking data points from different sources.
Yes.
So
Yes.
be it the team, be it their own reporting manager, be it the coach.
Yes.
And you're getting all this data. And thus, of course, the tool is also giving
Absolutely.
you, raising the bar.
And this is not something that is more subjective, keeping it on a notepad or somewhere. It is getting directed in the system.
So it's all technically.
It's all technically digital. It's supported by digital platform.
Right.
Yeah.
I know, and I just want to let everybody know. I think Escorts has done such a great job of it. This is the first time we've seen 100% implementation of all projects without an issue. Otherwise, it's such a nightmare for most people to ensure that post-program implementation, is not happening without too much
Absolutely.
of push. Here, there is a good pull to make
And
it happen.
the key, I think, what I see here is the linkage to the performance management. Because
Exactly.
now I can see here if I perform well, I am able to go to the next level very easily. So that is, I think, the key driver for this particular initiative.
Right. Thank you very much, Himanshu, for that very useful sharing. I'll just quickly take an example of another company where that has implemented managerial effectiveness, and I'll straight away just go into the process. Of course, like we said, since we're looking at a process, we're not looking at a just a a project. It's also supported by a process. So there is a extensive what we follow a 5I process to come to what do we need to change and clear measures of success that we are going to look at. But I'll move on because you'll be getting a copy of this presentation. I'll just move on to what we really did in the process. And I'm again going to look at what Himanshu said. So, our learning is that whenever we are talking about any change, the first aspect of it is the focus on self. What do I need to change and what do I need to do differently? So, the first is the role, clarifying very clearly the functional leadership requirements from that role and how does it shift from the earlier role. We, in this case, have also supported it through what we call Mastro, which is an app-based learning, so that there is reinforcement at every point. Then, of course, similarly, like in Escorts, here also we've used a assessment tool, which is a situation-based assessment, Supernova Watson, which looks at the behaviors, the leadership behaviors. But clearly, after that, there is a focus on functional competence development, looking at what is the gap, and then the leadership development component as well, and pretty much bringing the two together. So our learning is that usually organizations look at functional development separately and leadership development separately. What we are focusing on is to bring the two together because that is how a person experiences these competencies in their role. So, for example, focusing on what does a person need to do, let's say daily, and how can we improve that? What is he responsible for weekly, and how can we improve the performance weekly, and then monthly, and then so on quarterly. So they see that the program is linked to helping them perform their role more effectively. And then, of course, there are reinforcements and a clear assessment process in place because that measures the change and ensures that people are, all this is getting highlighted, people know how they're doing, making all these changes visible using technology. So all these elements have come together extremely well. So they know what is expected, they know how to do it, and the system is really propagating and helping them to do it. There is a certification at the end of it, linked to, of course, that this is a must-do initiative for any movement ahead. So I think putting all those pieces together has been really helpful. I'm cognizant of the time, and once again, I'd like to reiterate we will take one last question, but all questions that have come to us are very valuable. We will be coming back to you with our responses, and also we will be coming back to you with the recording of this webinar and the slide deck. So, if we are not able to answer the last question, please do bear with us. Um, the question that I really want to take, which is at the end, is looking at what critical areas mid managers should take care of while delegating the task so that the ground staff people do not feel overloaded. Anything you would like to say, Himanshu?
See, as a middle manager, what you just said, a lot of people do not understand first what the people's strengths and weaknesses are. So I think as a mid manager, first I need to do a real assessment of my team members. I need to do a really SWOT that I sit down and understand what are strengths of each of my team member, what are the weaknesses, what are the opportunity areas, and what are the threats. Because that is where we here's a human tendency, we tend to focus more uh, where people are really performing. and we tend to miss out on the people who really need our support. That is one area. The second thing I need to understand, we really need to understand as a middle manager, is what is the strength I have, what is the process excellence that I can do, and I can delegate or I can develop people in my team. Because that is where the transactional part, because when we say I'm more focused on what I need to do daily, can that be delegated? Can that be made digitized? Can that maybe be a part of process? Because if I spend 70% of my time every day on the daily work, that means I am somewhere not developing my team. Because most of the middle managers get in that stuck in that trap that he does not have that capability. He does not, or he or she does not have that competency. So the first question I asked them, that whose responsibility is to develop them.
Absolutely.
So I think the other aspect I also see, especially with legacy organization, is a lot of insecurity they have that if the person is able to do this, what will I do? I think times have changed categorically. If I am able to develop my team and I can do something better for the organization, I think the value of me being there is much higher. That I see it from a lens that a good leader is always the one and should be measured on how many good leaders he or she develops in the organization.
I think that's a great point to really end this seminar or this webinar with. So really, delegation is not about just passing down tasks. It's about developing people to be able to perform their role and in fact take your role. That is, I think, the understanding of delegation itself is something that mid managers should be very, very clear about. I would like to thank everybody and just end on this one note, which actually was very, I thought, profound. What the University of Columbia in Toronto has really observed, that mid-level leaders in any organization have the highest rate of depression and anxiety than leaders at any other level, whether it's the senior or the junior level. So there is great stress, and I think all of us owe it to the profession to really focus on this and try to come up with a winning formula. So thank you all for being patient, for being present, and for asking us so many questions. It is our pleasure that you were part of this webinar, and we will come back to you soon. Thank you once again.
Thank you.